Welcome to this class about auxiliary verbs. The most important thing for you to understand is that auxiliary verbs are used basically for two purposes. When you think about an auxiliary verb, think about this. Maybe in your own language, you need no help when you are going to say no or when you are going to ask a question. But in English, it is necessary. So when you think about auxiliary verbs, think about the verb, the meaning of auxiliary means assistant. So what I mean by this is that these words are going to help you do two things. You are going to ask questions and you're going to say no. So basically, if you have an auxiliary verb, I'm going to write it here. Auxiliary verb, it means you want to do two things. You want to say no or you want to negate. You want to say no with a question. Here, you just want to say no, or you want to ask something. If you have these two purposes, either to say no or to ask a question, then you need an auxiliary verb in English. Let us talk about the most common auxiliary verbs in English. So the first one, probably you have seen it in your courses, is the verb to be. So needless to say, we use am, is, and are for all the be forms. I am, you are, he is, she is. In the past form of the verb to be, we have was and were. I was, he was, she was, you were, we were, they were. Again, probably you know this. And the past participle would be the word been. Been. That would be the word for the past participle. I am going to guess here that you understand the difference between simple present, simple past, and past participle. So, if I have the verb to be, I can use the verb to be to say no. I can say, I am not studying. So I need this form to negate the sentence. And that's what I am trying to do here. Then I'm going to give you some other examples. And there are two key concepts for you to understand. If you have the verb to be, I'm going to write it here, the verb to be, you are going to need another verb. And this verb has to either end in ing or ed or its past participle form that you may remember, the three columns. One for present, one for past, and one for past participle. You can have the ed form of the verb, but if this verb is an irregular verb, you are going to need the past participle form of this verb. So in this first case, we are saying here, he is playing football. He is the verb to be, and the other verb ends in ing. It means the action is taking place at or around the time of speaking, and the day of the exam, they're going to give you this verb, and they're going to give you this one, the ing form, in the answer choices. So, for the simple past here, for example, we have he was playing football. He was playing. So, in that case, I'm using the verb to be in its past form, in its past conjugation. Then here, we have the verb to be in its past participle form. So I'm going to say he had or he has been playing football. He has been for present perfect progressive, and he had been for past perfect progressive. Then we can also say that the verb to be can be used in passive sentences when the following verb either ends in ed or its past participle form. For example, the house is or was built. Built from the verb build, which is irregular. Build, built, built. The house was built or is built. And here's another case. The house has or had been built. So I'm going to talk about the verb to have in one moment. Just I'm going to finish this one. For the future form, we can say the house will be built. Will be built is a sentence that you probably have studied in your previous courses. So think about the verb to be as a full verb. When you think about the verb to be as a full verb, it would mean that you don't need to follow, you don't need to have the verb to be followed by another verb. It would mean the verb to be is being used with its original meaning. And here, here's an example. They are 15 for positive sentences. For negative sentences, they are not 15. For question forms, are they 15? That would be the way to use it. So the verb to have as an auxiliary verb. You want to remember here, if you want to use the verb to have, you probably remember the conjugation I have, you have, he has, she has, we have, you have, they have. This is basic knowledge. If you have the verb to have in your sentence, the next verb has to end in ed. I'm going to write it here. Have. Oops, something happened. Have. So the next verb needs to end in ed or its past participle form. Its past participle form. And what that means is that have is going to be used with an ed verb or with a past participle form. In this case, it is past participle if the verb ends in or if the verb is irregular. In this case, he has played football. He had played football for present and past participle and past perfect tenses. Then we can say he has been playing. I'm going to use the verb in present perfect progressive. He has been playing football. For the past perfect, I can say he had been playing football. Then we are going to talk about the verb to have in the passive voice. So it would be like the house has or have been built. I am using the verb to be here, but this verb to be is in the third column, meaning it is in its past participle form. You want to remember the way the verb to have it is here. The way the verb to have is conjugated. Has and had, something you know, and with its past participle is had. Here are some examples. I have a car. I'm not using another verb. I am using the verb to have as a full verb. I have a car. I have got a car. I can negate these ones. Remember, you're going to say no, you need the help of another verb. This is why you say I do not have a car. Do I have a car? I am using the help of other verbs, auxiliary verbs. Here is the same. I have got. I have not got a car, to say no. Have I got a car, to ask the question. We can also talk about the verb will for future tenses, because will is also used for negative. I mean, you use the help of the verb will to say no in the future. He will not play football. And here, for future perfect tenses, he will have played football. So, I am going to summarize these ideas by basically saying that the three main auxiliary verbs in English are do, have, and the verb to be. That if we have the verb to do, the next verb needs to be in its base form. For example, he does not play. But if you have the verb to have here, the next verb has to either end in ed or its past participle form. And if you have the verb to be, the next verb has to either end in ing or ed. Those are the tips for you to understand when you take your test. These three verbs that I just mentioned are used for negating and asking. That is the real objective of using auxiliary verbs in English. Here are some examples with the verb do. Does he play football? Did she play football? You may remember did she is the verb do in its past form. Now, the second idea is that you can use the three verbs that I just mentioned. I'm gonna see if I can do it again. You can use the same three verbs as either full verbs, or auxiliary verbs. So, the three verbs I just mentioned, be, do, and have, can be used either as full verbs, or as auxiliary verbs. So this is the difference. This is what I want you to understand. Maybe you have studied these verbs in the past. I am pretty sure you have. But this is the concept I wanted you to understand. The three verbs that we're using here have two different forms. I can use have, I can use do, I can use be as either full verbs or as auxiliary verbs. If I use them as auxiliary verbs, the next verb needs to follow some kind of rules. But if I use them as full verbs, even their meaning, the meaning of the verb changes. So I hope this basic knowledge, this basic notion is clear, and I'll see you in the exercises.